Welcome back. I am your host, Jessie Towns, and this is the Keeping Shit Real podcast. This week, I'm going to have a little chat with you all about declarative language and actually how useful declarative language is to you as a parent to a child with PDA, or even just a child, just generally, neurodivergent or neurotypical. Declarative language is so helpful and beneficial to you with or without having a PDA. And now, declarative language is one of those which is highly regarded in the PDA community as being a really helpful tool to get your child to, and it's not about getting your child to do something. Declarative language is about making comments or statements, and it's not about asking or demanding that your child is to do things. For children with PDA, as we know, using declarative language, declarative statements and observations is a way to directly ask them without directly asking them. What it allows you to give them some control, but also reduce demands whilst having sort of direction of some sort of action to be taken. So you don't feel like you're constantly losing your mind, trying to get them to do something when they are obviously not going to do it, because the way in which we historically speak to children is we tell them what to do. So just a bit of an understanding then about PDA and why the correct use of language is so important. So the language that we use, we know with kids can either make or break a situation, but more so for a child that's got PDA. It's either going to accommodate or activate them. And that could be a situation or a task that they're in. And it's just really important that it plays a massive part in co-regulation. Let's be honest, we've all got lives. We all need to get out and do stuff. And sometimes when you've got a child with PDA, it's very, very difficult to be able to do that. Ask them to do something like getting their shoes on, getting the coat on to get out the door without it sounding like a demand. So declarative language is a way in. This is not, it's not going to sort all your issues and challenges that you have with a child with PDA just because you're using declarative language. Again, it's another tool, another strategy that you can use alongside everything else that you do for co-regulation that can really help a child with PDA. And what declarative language does, it's a tool for them it helps a child with PDA build thinking, problem solving, and it gives connection. And we know that it's all about connection and not correction instead of forcing compliance. Now, we know the nervous system reacts for children with PDA and they see demands as in everyday things that we ask them to do, and it makes them feel completely inadequate. However, the correct use of declarative language will empower a child to understand life potentially better. It makes them more really self-aware of the environment and the situation that they're in, but it also can build on their own self-advocacy. I'm predominantly talking about as children are getting older. As you know, I've got 3 sons. My eldest son is nearly 17. He's neurotypical. And I've got 8-year-old twins who are both ADHD, but my youngest twin is high functioning autistic and he has a PDA profile. And it's so important that we enable our children throughout their, young adulthood, later teen life to be able to self-advocate for themselves. So like I said, declarative language, declarative statements and third-party praise are super key for children that display a PDA profile. The key to declarative language is using imperative language, and that's okay when there's a safety issue or when you need to set limits and boundaries. But there's a different use. We have imperative language. So imperative language is a question or a sentence that demands a response. Declarative language or statements invite the child to learn and to think about the outcome. When declarative language, if you use it in a comment or a statement or observation, the best way to do it, I always think, is to think of it as an observation, like in the environment and what's going on around them. And it doesn't, it's not just a fixed thing. It could be people, it could be a family member, sort of like an action, getting dressed, or changes, maybe transitioning from the house to the car. But one thing that I will say is really key specifically, I would say, with children that have got PDA, is that you are matching your language to the age level of your child that you are talking to. If we're talking to a PDA with our adult head on and they are 6, it ain't going to work. But making sure that if we're using correct language, it does provide us with the opportunity. It gets them to see the bigger picture, and it should allow them to read like sort of non-verbal communications, especially if we're doing declarative statements, because it will really, really help them with any sort of problem solving. Imperative language then is when we are asking a question and it demands a response. So imperative language is very good, if we've got a safety issue. However, an example of, and I'm going to put this into layman's terms, so an example of an imperative like sentence is get dressed. All right, that's imperative. A declarative question would be, I've noticed it's time to get ready. Because what we're doing is we're planting a seed. All right, we're not telling them to do it, we're planting the seed. Another one that used to really tip my PDA over the edge is when my husband walks in, say hi to dad. That's an imperative question. It demands a response from the child. But if I say, oh, look, dad's home from work, it's an observation. I've made it, I've said it, I've dropped it. I've dropped it, let them think about it. So the reason why imperative and declarative language, it's so important to know the difference between it. An imperative statement or a language demands, it is seen as a demand. Whereas declarative language, you are sharing and you are inviting them to come and be a part of whatever it is you require them to do. Perfect example, put your coat on. Very imperative, it demands a response. Or you could say, using declarative language, I notice it's getting cold outside. So we're sharing an observation and we're inviting them to participate. They still may or may not. And like I said, what's really, really important here is that you completely understand that using declarative language and statements and third-party praise and observation, this isn't gonna magically make PDA go away. And I am absolutely not saying that if you use declarative statements all the time, your child is going to be able to go to school every day happy without any kickback, because that's just not true. Their nervous system regulation fluctuates, that it can change, and they find things incredibly difficult. So this is just an aid, just like the PANDA approach from the PDA Society. These are all aids. These are all ways in to help you have a little bit less batshit craziness at home. A few other examples. Say thank you. That's a really, really that's one that people always, I think, underestimate. That's a massive demand. Say thank you. Instead, you could say, oh, I heard Granny gave you something nice today. All right. And and it's about sharing that information and inviting them in. So with imperative language, it's really important that you're never going to master declarative language. I still get it wrong. No one's perfect. And if they say, oh, I've absolutely mastered it. When you use declarative statements and are moving away from imperative language, it completely honours a child with PDA's autonomy. And, so you can make simple comments that completely observe and invite your child to observe the situation or, whatever the scenario is that's going on around them. You could say, the cat looks hungry. Oh my God, I need to feed the cat. And that, and that's about, they may want to help you. But also using cognitive verbs or verbs that kind of model the way that you're thinking as an adult. Because what that helps a child with PDA do, it helps them reach a higher level of problem solving, and they've got that, that social connection then. But sort of things that you could say, so sort of cognitive verbs are think, remember, forget, know, imagine, decide. Now, for a long time, we would use wonder, but as our PDA has got older, he has become, they're incredibly intelligent children with PDA, and he is completely starts to see through if any sentence starts with, oh, I wonder. But he's like, nah, I wonder nothing. I know that there's a loss of autonomy coming here because you're ultimately packaging something up to get me to do something. So for us, wonder doesn't really work that much anymore. But also kind of using words that emphasize uncertainty and possibilities. So that helps a child with PDA have an alternate way of looking at a different possibility of the outcome. So, you can use maybe, you could use might, possibly, perhaps, sometimes, I don't know. Because these words that communicate your own, and words that that you then communicate that your own lack of knowledge. We all know that children with PDA, they love to tell us what to do. They love that level of equity that if we invite them and give them the invitation of opportunity for them to show us how something's done by demonstrating that we have a pretend sort of own lack of knowledge, it can be really powerful. If just act like you don't know something but you know that they won't have a fear of being wrong. So as long as you are pretty sure that they know the outcome, because again, that level of self-esteem, when they do get things wrong, their nervous system and that loss of autonomy can really take the impact for it. Because children with PDA spend their entire, a lot of their time in fight, flight, freeze or fawn, their nervous system is on such high alert all of the time that they are very, very in tune to their own feelings, but also other people's feelings. And you can use that to your benefit as well. So using words that relate to your own feelings that help them sort of weigh out the situation or the environment. Words, I can smell chips. Hint, hint, dinner's coming. Your brother looks upset. These are all kind of things that we can use to implement to really assist us and help us. And also another thing I wanted to sort of briefly mention before, how we can use PDA at home in terms of declarative language styles, is one thing is always invite the sort of person to help them engage and join you. Don't tell them what to do. Always try and use like first person pronouns. So, instead of saying, you've got to do that, why don't you use us, we, let's get ready, we could, and use it not just you, or I want you to do something, because actually, are we going to see that as a loss of control through autonomy loss? So, some declarative starters that you could use, like in sentences, you could use, I notice that it's really cold outside. Hint, hint, you need to put a coat on. Now, I say that, but, it's been very, very cold this week in the UK. And I don't know, autistic kids, they don't like wearing coats, do they? And that's what I'm really starting to notice. But actually, as long as my PDA has got a couple of layers on and he's got a hat, I do think like he's not going to catch a death of cold. But you could use, I'm thinking maybe I'm really, really hungry. Again, hint, hint, let's have some dinner. It looks like is another great one. Maybe we could. And I remember when, and these are all sort of, if you're just starting out in trying to use declarative language to like assist and support you doing everyday things, then these are ones that can be really, really good. Instead of saying, please stop shouting or please stop screaming, that's one that's very, very relevant to my house. I'm noticing it's getting really loud, everybody. Is anybody else's ears feeling the same as mine? Again, we're making an observation about the situation. So what we ultimately want to do is we want to make space for them to think. We don't want them to be obedient. I mean, they're not dogs. But when you speak to a child that's got PDA, always allow for a pause after you've spoken, because I think subconsciously we're humans. We can fire quite a lot of questions in very quick order. So pause after you've spoken. Try and not use any form of rhetorical questions like, why did you do that? It's not going to work. And try and use, I always think, open curiosity. Open the curiosity of, can you show me what you're doing? Instead of putting pressure on them. And you don't even need to speak to them sometimes. Sometimes you could just use eye contact to guide them to an observation, like a pair of shoes being out, a coat, dinner on the table, a juice bottle. And less is always more in everything. If they're good with timers and clocks, you could maybe use a timer and a clock to assist you. Doesn't work in our house, but you could also point to a clock and say, oh, it looks like we're getting close to leave, and let them see the clock. And it's one of these where when you start to trying to rewire your brain as a parent who's got a child to PDA, this is really, really hard. I don't get it right every day. By far from it, but on the really difficult days when we've got that absolute lowest tolerance of days, this is when I will try and use declarative language the most, because I find on a high tolerance day is that his nervous system is way more regulated. He is more tolerant, and he has a higher tolerance threshold, so he can cope with a lot more. And also the key is always model being regulated yourself. Like, listen, and I know how hard that is. Trust me. Don't ever underestimate how hard it can be if you've been told to fuck off. That how difficult it can be to try and keep yourself regulated. But model emotional regulation is key. If things are starting to feel quite rushed, don't start to then feel quite rushed. Now, another amazing model that we can use is third-party praise. Third-party praise is great, and basically we're celebrating the success of them, but not directly to them. And what it does, it allows them to overhear it. It encourages them to reflect, but it gives them autonomy without any sort of performance of pressure. And it really does help children with PDA feel completely recognised without feeling sort of singled out. It doesn't make them feel judged. And it really does create a safe emotional distance between the child and the compliment, like with no demand. And the reason why it works is that children with PDA really struggle with direct attention or praise because it's seen as a loss of autonomy. Quite often, if an amazing piece of like work comes home from my son's specialist school and I'm like, oh my God, and I forget, and I don't use third party praise, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. You must be so proud. Quite often it gets ripped up and thrown away because it's a perceived loss of, well, it's not a perceived, it is a loss of autonomy. And direct praise it can be seen as a hidden demand for children that have got PDA. So again, they feeling that they have to live up to a certain situation or an expectation. But indirect, overheard praise allows them to completely absorb any sort of positive feedback on their own terms. It's really good to say. You could say to your dog, oh my God, did you see Jessie's work? Wow, I was so impressed. You could say it to your husband, to your other children. And it's really, really powerful. And always keep it authentic with third party praise. Don't go over the top, because I think, as I said, children with PDA, they are incredibly tuned in and they can sniff out bullshit a mile off. And what happens is if it's not authentic, they're going to see straight through it straight away. And make sure it's about, when you use third party praise, use it in an observational context. But you obviously use it with a match that tone with an actual conversation. And it's not a performance review. We're not going through what they did well, what they didn't do well. They ain't got time for that. It's way too much, and they'll cotton on very, very quickly. Ways to troubleshoot when it comes to going wrong or using declarative language correctly is really, really slow down the speed of your language. Children need time to process, and they need to in order to respond to what you've said, they really need to understand what you are saying. And if we're firing loads of questions at them, they're not going to have a chance to decompartmentalise, think about it, and respond correctly. You're probably going to get met with a answer that is probably not very nice. If they ignore you trying to use declarative statements and declarative language, that's fine. What declarative language it does, it's about planting seeds. You're modelling thinking, your own thinking, and you're trying to connect with them. And resistance, we know straight away, is a form of communication. If they resist, we know that actually maybe they're having a difficult day. So don't keep on pushing. And it's not a failure. We know they have low tolerance days. And on those low tolerance days, it's very, very hard to try and get that nervous system back into an area where they feel that they are capable of being able to do things. And I get a lot of people say, but it's about authority. And if I'm just being all like, fannying around and I'm sort of skirting around the edges, I've lost my authority. And it's not about authority. And I think we need to really move away from authority-based language with any child, whether or not they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, because Declarative language, speaking to kids doesn't have to be permissive. It's about collaborating with kids, but also it keeps them psychologically safe as well. It's not like you versus them. Yeah, there may be times where if you've got a neurotypical child, you might have to discipline your children, but we can discipline children, neurotypical and neurodivergent, via connection and not being, I'm the parent, I know better. But also it keeps them feeling safe. It can engage in your child. Can you set limits? You absolutely can set limits, but you've just got to frame them differently. Don't get me wrong, limits are still important, but you just have to think about what you're saying and how you are saying it and how that message is being delivered. I mean, we've all heard the saying, don't shoot the messenger. And I think it's a situation where nobody wants to think, oh my God, I can't do this, I'm so terrible. It's not about being able to get this overnight because it's hard. I'm not going to joke. I read Linda K. Murphy's Declarative Language book, and I tell you what, I really struggled with it to start with. And then I had a bit of an epiphany. I downloaded it onto audio, and I found the Audible book much, much easier to understand. There's really, really descriptive examples of imperative language, and there's quite a lot about the psychology of language. But when it comes to children with PDA, I mean, if you've not read the book yet, I definitely will highly recommend it. But for me, I found it really difficult to start with until I started listening to it on audio. So just before I finish, let's just remember, declarative language is about sharing an observation. It's about saying something about, how you feel or having an idea. We're inviting them to think and we're inviting them to connect. We're also modelling reflection, curiosity and collaboration. And it's not about a demand. We're trying to remove pressure and get a child with PDA to engage. And it's their choice if they want to engage. You could be the best at dropping declarative language all day long, but it doesn't matter. If a child with PDA's tolerance level is really low and their nervous system is shot because they had loads of loss of autonomy, it's still not going to work. And it's about really key of noticing that as well. Remember, declarative language is a mindset shift. It's not just about new phrases, and it is really, really hard to try and remember that sometimes it is really, really difficult. Well, that's my mini workshop of declarative language complete. And I just wanted to say, I do have a declarative language workshop, a video workshop that was recorded. And if you need the resources, you can go into my notes in the show notes for this podcast. If you want a bit more of an in-depth understanding, there's also some statements, some examples that you can use. But don't forget, if you're really struggling with your child who's got PDA and you are like, fucking hell, I can't cope, nobody gets me, you need to come and join my PDA parent circle, because I'm telling you, I have got the best group of parents. We have just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the PDA parent circle. And I am telling you, we have had over 540 parents come and go. Some have stayed. And they've used resources. Some are still there, but it is absolutely amazing. And I'm so proud of all the parents that have, are still members who support me, and, we're just there for each other. And it's just great that we are just there for each other. And I absolutely love it. So before I sign off, please don't forget to download, subscribe, rate and review the pod. It will be so helpful for my rankings. And I will leave all the stuff in the show notes that you need, but please help a girl out. Download, subscribe, rate and review, and I'll see you next week. Love you. Bye.